These samples of architectural styles will whet your appetite for architectural theory and history assignment. Here is an example of ancient architecture of Zimbabwe. The great enclosure has dressed walls up to 36 feet high, extending 820 feet. This is the largest ancient structure south of the Sahara Desert. An example of ancient Middle Eastern architecture is the ziggurat of Ur. It was built in the early Bronze Age, the 21st century BC, during the reign of King Shulgi. The massive step pyramid is 98 feet high, or about 8 stories tall. Classic architecture includes Greek architecture. The Parthenon is a former temple of the goddess Athena. Construction began in 447 BC and completed 9 years later in 438 BC. The Parthenon is an example of post and lintel construction and is surrounded by columns. Roman architecture is another form of classic architecture. The Colosseum, completed in AD 80, is the largest amphitheatre ever built. It could hold between 50 and 80,000 spectators. It also hosted staged water battles. The St. Sofia Church in Sofia, Bulgaria, is an example of Byzantine architecture. It was completed in the 6th century. The current building is a basilica with 3 altars. It stands in the middle of an ancient necropolis with many tombs, both under and near the church. Gothic architecture evolved from Romanesque architecture in the 1200s. Its characteristics include the pointed arch, ribbed vault, and the flying buttress. The Rheims Cathedral in France is constructed with the pointed arch prominent on the interior and exterior. The ribbed vaults are also visible in the interior. Renaissance architecture emphasized symmetry, proportion, geometry, and the regularity of parts. The Palazzo Farnese, completed in the 16th century, was designed by Antonio del Salgano the Younger. Sangallo is considered one of the most prominent architects of the 16th century. The Sistine Chapel in Vatican City is probably the most famous example of Renaissance architecture. Michelangelo spent 4 years painting the ceiling, from 1508 to 1512. The painted area is 131 feet long by 43 feet wide. The Palazzo Te, located in Mantova, Italy, is an example of Mannerist architecture. Mannerist was a form of both art and architecture, popular from approximately 1520 to 1580. The Palazzo Te was designed by Giuliano Romano. The Villa Farnese was designed by Giacomo Barozzi da Vignola. Building began in 1559, and the villa is a classic example of Mannerist architecture. Mannerist architecture used ornate decoration sparingly, and instead focused on contrast between the small amount of set pieces and simple backgrounds. The Baroque period began in the late 16th century in Italy. It is heavily associated with the Catholic Church Counter-Reformation, a response to the Protestant Reformation occurring at the time. This dramatic architecture style played with light and shadow and attempted to appeal to people's emotional connection with architecture. While Baroque architecture is often associated with European cities, the style can be found in many nations once colonized by European powers. Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception Church in Goa, India is one such example. The Guggenheim Museum in New York, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, is an example of modern architecture. Modern architecture includes a wide scope of styles, but its most famous attributes include form follows function, simplicity, and clarity. Two key foundations of modernist architecture are social change and new engineering and technological developments. The Salk Institute for Biological Studies, completed in 1965, was designed to reflect Dr. Jonas Salk's vision of open scientific exploration and discovery. American Neoclassical architecture began in the late 18th century and continued into the early 20th century. The Lincoln Memorial, completed in 1922, is considered one of the last neoclassical structures built in the United States. American neoclassical architecture began in the late 18th century and continued into the early 20th century. The Lincoln Memorial, completed in 1922, is considered one of the last neoclassical structures built in the United States. 20th century architecture defies singular definition. It is composed of a variety of styles, often drastically different from one another. The skyscraper evolution, such as the Houston skyline, is a type of 20th century architecture seen in cities around the world. Postmodern architecture of the 20th century aims to marry function and artistic design. It also incorporates ornate aesthetics, harking back to Gothic and Renaissance styles. The Portland building, designed by Michael Graves and opened in 1982, is an icon of postmodern architecture. Since 21st century architecture is still in its infancy, it is difficult to know what influence the current state of architecture will have on future generations. Unique designs featuring glass and metal are ubiquitous with 21st century design. The Coast Capital Savings head office building in Surrey, BC is one such example. Sustainability and green designs are emerging attributes of 21st century architecture. One such example is Vancouver-based Acton Austria Architects' design of UBC Brock Commons. Brock Commons is an 18-story residential building that will be the world's tallest mass timber building when construction is complete.